So your project at the museum was before my time there. Can you remind me what year you started the project? Was it,
1999.
that's what I thought. And how did it come about?
There was a state arts council person who was into art and education, had some funding, and wanted me to go to Enloe High School and quote unquote teach. And I said, well, I don't know how to teach unless I make something. And so the idea of doing a piece came about, and they had some meager funding, and the group came to the art museum and said, hey, do you want this to happen here? And the initial answer was no.
Nice.
And it was a newly arrived Larry Wheeler. So I got up from the meeting when I could hear it was no, and I said, okay, fine. And I just sort of left the meeting and was waiting on the elevator, and Larry comes up and says, well, wait a minute. I think this is a good idea. And I said, well, why am I not getting that vibe from the meeting? And he said, well, yeah, we'll work on that, but I am the director, he said.
That sounds like Larry.
And it was at that moment that this piece came, I mean, it started to head in the direction of where it went. And I didn't know what the piece was
Hmm.
quite, and did models, and I believe the museum owns, or I kind of left it there. So de facto, the museum owns the little maquette.
I'll have to look for
I
that.
hope it's around because I don't have it.
I bet it's in art storage hidden away.
Hidden away, yep. And then, but more importantly, or very importantly, I made these full scale sleds. They weren't round; they were diamond shaped, but they, you could. So it was a frame, a frame that you could see through that would frame space. And I could move them around by myself. And they were 20 feet tall. I mean, I don't know how long I walked. I walked for miles because I'd go to the newly completed amphitheater, or the performance space.
Oh, at the
Yeah.
museum. Hmm.
Picture this, and from all these different vantages. And there were no golf carts that I had access.
Right. It was just you.
It was just me trumping around in my boots, and I spent days citing the piece and figuring out how big it needed to be.
So would you say the impetus for Gyre was from the actual site, from the landscape, or did you have the idea for the piece already in mind and then you had to find the right site on the museum campus?
Um, Once again, kind of both. Um, so this was the third earth casting. One was done in total privacy of a private place. The other essentially private, but it actually was right alongside a public road. And I did them for, I bamboozled two different people into paying for the materials, because I didn't have enough money to do that. And the crane, so direct costs.
Mhm.
And so I did two, and this was the third and first really public one. So I was working on earth casting as a way of working, and the kind of shapes that felt I could pull off then. I'm much better at it now. And that was going on simultaneous with the siting of the piece. So, um, so the siting had to do with there was no master plan for the museum. The museum said you can pick any site you want, and I'm
Great.
really glad I didn't pick up the obvious site, which is up on Blue Ridge Road,
Yes.
which that would have been. There was this beautiful round circle of trees that, had they grown 30 years, would have been
Yeah.
striking. Uh,
So the museum park really grew up around your piece.
so I thought that the 100 acres from the prison would come. I mean, there's every indication that, but it wasn't a done deal at all. I just thought that that was gonna happen. That was logical for that to happen. So I picked a site on the interior, and the first pathway, bike path. The first, it was just a ring, and then it's expanded since. Was that deal had happened. So that was the first kind of site element that the museum did.
So for people who don't know about your earth casting process, could you just describe how you made the piece at the museum?
Sure. We dug 3 trenches. There are 3 ellipses. And so each one was made by digging a trench with a backhoe and by hand in the ground. And then lowering steel reinforcement that was, so think of a donut of steel that went down into this ring. And then we filled up the trench with the steel in it with concrete, fairly high-tech concrete, pretty strong stuff. And then after 28 days of curing, we dug around it on both sides, kind of like releasing a cake from a cake pan. And then we picked it up with a, as I recall, 60-ton crane.
That must have been a terrifying moment.
They still are. Well, I wouldn't say terrifying, but plenty of high energy, shall we say.
Yes. Your adrenaline is going.
Yeah, yeah. And then we stood it up onto a footing, a sub-footing that we had already poured. And then we prop it up with temporary bracing and then pour around this big lug and footing. That's all below grade, but there's quite a bit of concrete down there holding it up against the hurricanes.
Yes, it seems extremely stable.
So through a lot of hurricanes.
Yes, incredible. What is it like for you to see that piece 20 years later?
Well, sometimes that's a pretty horrifying experience when you see old work and you think, I don't have that feeling at all. I love the sighting of it. Part of the sighting of it involved me sitting on the bleachers, imagining listening to really good rock and roll and seeing my piece filtered through the trees beyond. That was part of my criteria. And so I do that. And
Nice.
I go listen to great music there and I see the piece. And so, and then even more important than that, just seeing the people and how the park has evolved so wonderfully. And for Gyre to be a part of that is really it's a very sweet experience for me.
Well, I think it has truly become an iconic landmark for the museum. I would say it is hands down the most photographed work in the museum's entire collection. So I don't know if you look at our Twitter or Instagram feed that our marketing department oversees, but they often post visitors' photographs. And I would say on a regular basis, it's your work that is being photographed. All times of year, all times of day. It's a graduation photograph site. It's a prom photograph site. It's a wedding photograph site. It is astounding. And I don't know if you've seen this, but we have a visitor who loves it so much, she had her arm tattooed with it.
I have seen that, which with a photograph of the tattoo in the foreground and the piece in the background that is just, I love that.
Yeah.
Well, and people have been, I'm sure permission was not granted, but I don't know. But I know of 2 quasi-burials that have happened. Ashes have been scattered.
That was not with our knowledge, I would say, but very interesting.
You know, it's a benign organic matter.
Yeah. Well, I think, it's interesting to me to hear that for you, this was, when you made this piece, it was really in an experimental phase of that whole body of work of these earth castings, and to see how well it stood the test of time. I would say not only just for its like durability and physical longevity, but aesthetically and artistically, it's really a huge achievement.
Mhm. Well, thank you. Yeah.
We're lucky to have it.
It set things off for me, and and it's still a piece I hear more about maybe than any other piece that I've done all over the country and beyond. I mean, I
Wow.
hear about it a lot.
That's wonderful. And then my kind of closing question, which we're asking a lot of artists as we do these kind of online projects, is just kind of your thoughts about being an artist in this current moment and time.
Well, I think my view of some of history is that art has a way of fighting back uh, when times get difficult. Financial times, physical times, warfare, times of war. Um, Art processes that, or helps our society um, deal with things. And as an artist, it's helping me deal with things. I'm extremely lucky in that I can go to work
Mhm.
um, in in total isolation and be full on at work. And I'm making a lot of stuff right now. I have few other interruptions, and I'm just working many hours a day and loving it, ironically.
Good.
Now, what I do that might get out into the world, it's too soon for my own work to respond to the virus, but I suspect it may.
Mhm.
I mean, it depends on how long this goes, but um, it's affected how I work in that I'm working a whole lot on smaller things that I can do by myself.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think at times like this, art in any form can be kind of solace and refuge and offer hope in some ways. And it will be interesting to see. I think artists don't always respond immediately to something like this,
Right.
but over time you see how it kind of filters through their work and informs their work. And it will be interesting to see how that plays out.
Yeah, there is kind of an immediate desire sometimes that I felt, and I see that in other artists of, oh, I've got to respond, and I am cautious about that.
Yes, I agree. Well, thank you so much. We really appreciate your time.
Great. I hope it is what you were looking for. Thank you all. We could pull this off in a short time. Well done. This is the state moving really quickly.
Thank you and
Linda,
stay
nice to
well.
see you, sort of.
Yeah, you too. Stay well.
You too.